The sound of laughter echoed from the far end of the restaurant, but it felt distant, like a song I'd once known but could no longer sing. I stood there, my hand still gripping the strap of my purse, the soft hum of conversation falling into uneasy silence. My name is Evelyn Calloway. I'm 62 years old, a widow and a woman who has learned to carry her dignity like a shield. But that night in Charleston, under the glitter of chandeliers and the stares of strangers, I realized dignity sometimes means fighting to keep your silence when humiliation dares you to speak. My son, Lucas, sat at the center of the table, perfectly tailored, perfectly smug. His wife, Paige, tilted her glass with practiced grace. Her voice was smooth venom wrapped in silk. "Go beg on the streets, you beggar." The words rang clear, deliberate, meant to wound. The room froze. My knees weakened, but I forced my posture upright. I had worked too long, fought too hard to let this woman who had never known hunger, never scrubbed floors until her fingers cracked, strip me of my pride. My gaze met hers, calm and steady. I could feel the burn of dozens of eyes watching, waiting for my response. I offered none. The waiter's hesitant glance met mine. I gave the smallest nod. He turned away, understanding what most couldn't. I was not leaving. Not yet. I had built my life on restraint, on control, and tonight control was my weapon. As I stood there, I thought of everything that had brought me to this moment, the years after my husband died when Lucas was barely 15, and the world felt like a series of locked doors I had to open alone. I worked mornings in a law office where no one remembered my name, and evenings at an Italian restaurant where the heat of the kitchen felt like penance. I'd serve tables by night and review invoices by dawn, each paycheck a fragile bridge toward survival. I still remember the ache of my hands, the sleepless nights, the quiet moments when I'd whisper to myself, "Keep going, Evelyn." I sold my wedding ring to pay Lucas's first semester of college tuition. I watched him hold the receipt, tears glinting in his eyes, and say, "I'll make you proud." For years I believed him. For years I thought love and sacrifice could build gratitude. But over time, love turned to expectation, and my giving became his entitlement. Paige only polished it, turned it into performance. I'd seen the change, how Lucas's words started to sound like hers, how my advice became irrelevant, how I became a shadow in the life I had built for him. But that night, standing in front of their sneers, something inside me shifted. I felt the years of silence gather strength. The waiter returned quietly, placing a single envelope in front of me. The white paper gleamed under the chandelier's glow. I didn't speak as I took my seat, the one they'd left empty, assuming I'd walk away. My fingers brushed the envelope, the texture familiar, the weight symbolic. Paige's laughter faltered, Lucas's smirk stiffened. "What's that?" he asked, his tone suddenly sharp. I met his eyes, my voice steady. "Proof," I said. The word was soft but final. I opened the envelope slowly, each movement deliberate. Inside were the documents I'd kept for years, the ownership records, the financial reports, the quiet evidence of what they'd both forgotten. "You've dined here often, haven't you?" I said, gesturing around the restaurant. "This place, this moment, everything you see, it's mine. I'm the majority owner." Gasps rippled around the room. The waiter gave a small nod, confirming what they now couldn't deny. Paige's fingers froze around her glass. Lucas's complexion paled as realization dawned. I leaned back, resting my hands lightly on the table. "I built this." I continued, my tone calm, almost conversational. Every brick, every paycheck, every late night. While you were chasing promotions and pretending I didn't exist, I was investing in something real. Lucas's lips parted, his arrogance faltering for the first time in years. Paige's painted smile cracked into disbelief. Around us, the diners whispered, the balance of the room shifting. For years, they had looked at me as though I was lesser, as though my worth began and ended with what I could give them. Tonight, I took it back. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I spoke like someone who had nothing left to prove. If you want to insult me, do it in your own home, but not here. Not in mine. Paige's eyes darted toward Lucas, silently pleading for control, but he had none left to offer. The waiter appeared again, this time with quiet composure. "Mrs. Calloway," he said respectfully, "would you like me to escort them out?" I looked at my son, the man I had raised, and for a fleeting second I saw the boy who used to fall asleep against my shoulder after long days at school. My chest tightened, but I kept my expression calm. "Yes," I said, "they're finished here." As they stood, Paige's face burned red and Lucas's jaw clenched, humiliation coloring his every move. The diners didn't look away this time, they watched, silent witnesses to a reckoning. I stayed seated until they were gone, the door closing softly behind them. Only then did I exhale, the trembling in my hands returning like an aftershock. But beneath the exhaustion was a quiet, powerful peace. I had reclaimed something they couldn't touch, my self-respect. When I finally left the restaurant that night, the city was cool and quiet. The air smelled faintly of jasmine and salt from the harbor. My reflection in the glass doors looked older, yes, but sharper too, like steel tempered by flame. I knew this moment wasn't the end of our story, but it was the first time I'd written my own chapter. The next morning I woke with a strange stillness inside me. Not peace exactly, but the quiet that comes after a storm has passed. The sunlight spilled through the curtains of my Charleston apartment, golden and gentle, brushing across the teacup on my nightstand. My phone buzzed on the dresser, messages from Lucas, 3 missed calls, and one from Paige. None of them were apologies, just anger wrapped in confusion, as if I were the one who had embarrassed them. I silenced the phone and poured myself tea instead. I'd spent my life answering every call, every need, every demand. Today I would let the silence speak for me. After breakfast, I walked to the small law office downtown where I'd once been a secretary. The manager, a kind man named Howard, had always said I had an eye for details that most people missed. He wasn't wrong. Those long years of typing contracts and scanning legal documents had quietly taught me how to protect myself, how to read what others ignored, how to plan 3 steps ahead. When I left that job years ago, I didn't leave empty-handed. I left with knowledge, and that knowledge had built everything I owned, including the restaurant. By 10 a.m., I was seated across from David, my attorney, a calm man with silver-rimmed glasses and a habit of polishing his pen before speaking. He'd been with me through the early days when I'd first bought into the restaurant, and he knew this meeting wasn't about revenge, it was about boundaries. "I'm ready to make adjustments," I said simply. He nodded, sliding a folder toward me. Inside were the papers for my will. My previous version had been generous, too generous. I'd assumed that Lucas would understand gratitude, that Paige would learn kindness through example. But life had taught me that love without limits becomes servitude. "I want to make the inheritance conditional," I told him. "Not based on age, not on status, but on character." David looked up, listening carefully, meaning he asked. I leaned back in the chair, my voice even, meaning they will receive only if they learn humility, respect, and compassion. If not, it goes elsewhere. He nodded, the faintest trace of approval in his expression. To whom would you like it to go instead? I thought for a long moment, then smiled. To women who've lived like I did, quiet, hard-working, invisible until they decide they won't be. That afternoon I visited the restaurant. The staff greeted me with soft smiles, a mix of respect and affection. They had seen everything last night, the confrontation, the calm, the power that came not from shouting but from control. I walked the floor, noting the rhythm of lunch service, the hum of conversation, the clink of glasses, the faint scent of garlic and wine. It was running perfectly. You did well, I said quietly to the manager, a young woman named Clara who had once been a dishwasher. You've built this into something solid. She looked at me grateful. You taught me how, she said. Her words stayed with me as I sat in my office overlooking the harbor. The paperwork David had sent over sat neatly on the desk beside a cup of tea. I could still hear Paige's voice echoing from last night, cruel and sharp, and Lucas's silent complicity beside her. Yet for the first time, I didn't feel anger, just clarity. They had mistaken kindness for weakness. What they didn't understand was that patience, when pushed far enough, becomes power. The following week, Lucas showed up at my apartment. I saw his car pull up before he rang the bell, sleek, expensive, and utterly out of place against the simplicity of my building. When I opened the door, he stood there, shoulders slumped slightly, guilt and pride warring on his face. "Mom," he began, but I raised my hand. "Not yet," I said. He hesitated, stepping inside. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The air between us was heavy, but not with anger, with truth. Finally, he exhaled. "I don't know what you're doing," he said. "You've embarrassed us." Paige says I stopped him there. Paige says many things, I interrupted softly. And for years you've listened. But now you'll listen to me. I motioned to the folder on the table. This is the inheritance agreement. I've updated it. If you and Paige wish to remain part of my life and my legacy, you'll follow it. If not, I wish you both peace. His brow furrowed. Conditions. You're serious. I looked at him not as a mother who owed him love, but as a woman who had earned respect. Completely, I said. For 1 year, you'll work at my restaurant. No management, no office titles. Just work on the floor with the staff. And you'll volunteer twice a week at the senior center downtown. You'll learn what it means to serve others, not yourself. At the end of the year, we'll revisit everything. Until then, the accounts are frozen. His face reddened. This is insane, he snapped. But even as he said it, I could see the flicker of something, fear, maybe realization that I wasn't bluffing. I've worked my whole life, I said, quietly standing to meet his gaze. Now it's your turn. Lucas said nothing. He turned to leave but paused at the door. Paige will never agree to this, he muttered. I gave him a faint, steady smile. Then Paige will learn too. Or she won't. But the world doesn't bend for either of you anymore. After he left, I stood by the window for a long time watching the sunlight shimmer on the water. I felt something rare relief. For decades, I'd been the invisible hand that built my family's comfort. Now I was the hand that would teach them what comfort really cost. The following weeks moved with a quiet precision that felt almost poetic. The same son who once scoffed at my sacrifices now arrived at the restaurant every morning at 7:30 a.m., wearing the same black apron as the rest of the staff. Lucas's expensive watch looked out of place against the rolled sleeves of his work shirt, his polished shoes smudged by the end of his first shift. I watched from the corner office one morning, unseen as he fumbled with Trey's mistimed orders and muttered apologies under his breath. He wasn't arrogant anymore. He was awkward, uncertain, and tired. But he was trying. Paige, on the other hand, arrived 2 days later. Her immaculate manicure and designer handbag clashed with the smell of onions and the steam from the kitchen. She was assigned to the host stand where the job required warmth, patience, and humility. 3 things she had spent years avoiding. On her first day, she barely lasted 2 hours before stepping outside to cry. The staff, polite but detached, offered her no sympathy. They had all worked their way up just as I once had, and they knew this wasn't cruelty. It was consequence. I didn't check in with them directly for the first week. I wanted the lessons to sink in through sweat, frustration, and silence. The waitstaff began telling small stories, a spilled drink here, a misplaced order there, but each day ended the same, both Lucas and Paige returning quietly to their small apartment, exhausted and humbled. The entitlement that had once filled their words now dissolved into the simple rhythm of labor. After the first month, I asked my manager Clara for an update. Her lips curved into a thoughtful smile. "He's learning," she said simply. "He doesn't complain anymore. He's even started helping the new hires clean up after closing. Paige is slower, but she's listening. The customers like her more when she forgets to act important." That night, I drove past the restaurant, watching from my car, as Lucas stood by the door holding it open for an elderly couple leaving dinner. His expression was tired but genuine. When the woman smiled at him, he smiled back, not out of habit, but sincerity. It was small, barely noticeable to anyone else, but to me it was everything. Outside of work, they volunteered twice a week at the Charleston Senior Center. The first time they arrived, the director called to confirm they were serious. "Yes," I said, "they'll show up every Tuesday and Friday." "And if they don't let me know?" They did show up begrudgingly at first, but soon began to understand what real service meant. Lucas spent time repairing wheelchairs and replacing batteries in hearing aids. Paige helped an elderly woman named Ruth knit scarves for winter drives. They both struggled to hide their discomfort when the residents told stories of loneliness, abandonment, and children who never visited. But slowly those stories began to mirror their own reflection back at them. One afternoon I stopped by the center unannounced. I watched as Paige knelt beside a woman in a wheelchair, holding her hand and listening intently. Her usual sharpness had softened into something almost kind. Lucas across the room was helping a man fix his phone, his patience surprising even him. When he looked up and noticed me watching, he froze. For a moment I thought he might storm out in embarrassment, but instead he offered me a small, hesitant nod. Not an apology. Not yet. But recognition. That night when I returned home, I found a single message waiting on my phone. It was from Lucas. "Mom, I didn't realize how hard this would be," it read. "But maybe that's the point. I'll keep going." I stared at the message for a long time, my chest tightening with something fragile and bittersweet. After all these years, it wasn't the apology I expected, but it was the one I needed. Months slipped by, marked not by confrontation but quiet consistency. Lucas learned to balance trays without trembling. Paige began showing up early to arrange the hostess stand and greet guests with genuine warmth. Their marriage, once a mirror of arrogance and performance, began to look more like partnership. They'd come home together, hands stained with dish soap, faces tired but calm. For the first time since they'd married, they seemed real. As their year of service approached its end, I invited them to dinner not at the restaurant but at my home. The table was modestly set, the food simple roasted chicken, vegetables, and wine. Lucas arrived first, carrying a small bouquet of lilies. "For you," he said, setting them down. His voice was low, uncertain. Paige followed her smile, hesitant but sincere. We sat in silence for a moment before he finally spoke. "You were right," he said quietly. "We didn't understand what it meant to work for something, or to respect what others give." I studied his face, the fine lines that hardship had etched into his once proud features. He looked older, not in years, but in understanding. "It's not about punishment," I said softly. "It's about learning what value really means. It's not in what you own, it's in what you earn." Paige nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. "I was cruel to you," she said. "I thought your strength made you weak. I was wrong. I didn't respond right away." Instead, I reached across the table and placed my hand over hers. "The apology I said was never owed. The change was." We ate quietly after that, the silence warm rather than strained. Outside, the Charleston evening hummed with cicadas, the air soft with summer salt. For the first time in years, I felt peace, not because I'd won, but because they'd grown. As they left that night, Lucas turned back at the door. "Mom," he said softly, "thank you for not giving up on me." I smiled. "You gave me every reason to. But I didn't because I knew the boy I raised was still in there somewhere." When the door closed behind them, I stood alone in the quiet, letting the moment settle deep into my chest. Justice hadn't come through anger, it had come through patience, discipline, and faith that some lessons take years to bloom. The final part of their year arrived quietly without fanfare. The air that morning was heavy with spring rain, the streets of Charleston slick and glistening under the soft gray sky. I sat by the window of my office at the restaurant, watching raindrops slide down the glass, thinking of how far we had all come. A year ago, this place had been a battleground of humiliation and pride. Today it was a classroom of humility and grace. Lucas arrived just after 8:00 a.m., shaking off his umbrella before entering. He didn't know I was there. He moved with quiet confidence, now greeting the staff by name, his voice calm and respectful. I watched him inspect the dining area, adjusting a few chairs and helping Clara polish silverware before service began. His movements were precise, unhurried, and honest. The arrogance that once clouded his every gesture was gone. Later, Paige arrived. Gone were the heels and designer purses. She wore a simple blouse and jeans, her hair tied back in a loose ponytail. She chatted softly with the hostess and carried menus to each table without being asked. I could hear laughter at the front door, customers greeting her warmly. She had become what she once mocked, grounded, kind, and real. By noon, the restaurant hummed with its usual rhythm, but this time I walked onto the floor. Conversations dimmed slightly as I approached. Lucas spotted me first and froze, a look of apprehension flickering across his face, before softening into relief. Paige turned, and her expression mirrored his. I smiled faintly. "You've both done well," I said simply. Lucas exhaled shoulders, relaxing for the first time that day. "We tried," he said, voice low. "Not for the inheritance, but for ourselves." I nodded, feeling a quiet swell of pride. "That's the point," I replied. "Money can't teach respect. Work can, reflection can, and love the kind that doesn't enable can." Paige's eyes shimmered. "We didn't understand what you were doing," she admitted softly. "We thought you were punishing us." I smiled gently. "No," I said. "I was teaching you how to see me. And more importantly, how to see yourselves." The staff applauded quietly as I handed them a sealed envelope, their inheritance documents. Lucas hesitated before taking it, his fingers trembling slightly. "What's in there?" he asked. "More lessons?" I chuckled softly. "Something like that," I said. "But this time you'll read it when you get home." That evening, as I closed the restaurant, I found myself thinking back over the decades that had shaped me. The widow years of scraping by, the long nights cleaning offices after hours, the endless invisible sacrifices that no one ever thanked me for. Those years had carved me into someone who understood the power of silence, the strength in patience, and the importance of boundaries. For too long I had equated love with giving until nothing remained. Now I understood that love, real love, also means teaching others where giving must stop. The next morning Lucas called. His voice was steady, emotional. "Mom," he began, "we read your letter." I could hear Paige quietly sniffing in the background. "You gave the majority of your estate to the foundation," he said slowly. "To women who sacrificed their lives for their families." I closed my eyes, the rain tapping softly against the window pane. "Yes," I said, "because I was one of them once, and because no woman like me should ever feel unseen again." There was a long silence on the line, then his voice softer now. "You're right," he whispered. "We understand now, truly." Weeks later, I stood on the stage of the Charleston Women's Initiative, a small non-profit that had just received its first major endowment. My endowment. The foundation's mission was simple: to provide education, housing, and support for older women rebuilding their lives after years of family sacrifice. As I looked out at the audience faces lined with stories of endurance and resilience, I felt a deep, quiet satisfaction. After the event, I walked along the harbor, the air cool and filled with the scent of salt and jasmine. The city lights reflected on the water like small promises. I thought of Lucas and Paige, of how the cycles of pride and pain had finally given way to understanding. The anger had burned itself out, replaced by something stronger: mutual respect. They visited more often now, not out of obligation, but out of genuine affection. They brought flowers, laughter, and sometimes tears. The conversations were real, honest, equal. One Sunday afternoon, months later, they invited me to dinner at their apartment. It was small but warm, filled with the scent of roasted herbs and music playing softly from a corner speaker. As I sat at their table, surrounded by simple food and genuine laughter, I realized how far we had come from that cruel night in the restaurant. Lucas poured me a glass of wine and smiled. This time he said, "There's always a seat for you." I looked around the table at the worn chairs, the mismatched plates, and the peace that had taken so long to earn, and I smiled back. "Good," I said softly, "because I built the table." That night, as I returned home, the harbor lights flickered across the water, and I thought about everything life had taught me. Respect is not inherited, it is earned. Dignity cannot be taken, it must be lived. And silence, when chosen, can be the loudest form of strength. To everyone watching, remember this: you don't need to shout to reclaim your worth. Sometimes the calmest voice in the room is the one that changes everything. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs to hear it and tell me in the comments what dignity means to you. Don't forget to follow for more stories that remind us that strength often begins in silence.